So this concept about imaging being important, and especially for the life sciences, is quantified here. And it just points out that imagery is not only gotten from instruments like MRI images, it's also got, as we'll see later on, from light sources. And so we need to somehow set up an activity which does the best possible job for doing processing these images. And as there's so many of these images, maybe some pipeline and some back-end resource, which is either in a cloud or a supercomputer, is needed to be a bioimaging resource. Um, so that's the idea here. In this case here, that they're proposing to use high performance computing, but I think they could do the same thing with appropriate clouds. And one needs to obviously not only get the data into the cloud or the supercomputer, manage the storage, um, run the right algorithms to enhance the images and extract segments and objects from the images, and find either human or other ways of extracting features. And there's our set of image processing libraries mentioned here, which I'm not personally familiar with. ImageJ, Omoro, and Volrover. Now we come to one of the genomics examples. It comes from NIST. They have actually, probably in the scale of genomics, so not a huge data set, but it's very typical of the issues where DNA sequences produce hundreds or maybe thousands of gigabytes of data per day, and that volume has increased much faster than Moore's law. I showed that slide in the introduction. And proteomics also provides equally large amounts of data, and NIST is 40 terabytes and they're petabytes at NIH, and actually probably most labs nowadays can or do have petabytes of data from their relatively cheap $100,000 gene sequencer that you can buy commercially. There's a lot of software, most of it is open source, and some of it requires actually large memory. It's a well-known challenging problem to process sequence data and to basically take all these little fragments the sequencer produces and aligns them. And so this particular project is very typical of many, many projects. It's just one of lots of such projects. And this one project has 40 terabytes. Here we have a rather more global discussion of genomics. We're in the metagenomics case, where you're looking at multiple genomes, such as that extracted from environmental studies. Take pond water samples across the world and compare ponds or something like that. And that has even larger data sets. You need to find which genes are in a particular sample, find out their functions, look at the pathways implied, characterize the similarity or dissimilarity between these samples we take from different environments. This is sometimes called environmental genomics. And then we try to work out why these particular changes happened and to relate it to environmental features. And then we need to look at we're obviously going to have these huge data samples. You look at subsamples of particular issues. So they're building, this use case is building a web-based analysis system. And there's a lot of these standard tools which are mentioned here. And they will be accessible through the web. Currently, they use relational databases, and they have 50 terabytes, this particular group of data. In relational databases already finding this hard. The claim is NoSQL doesn't work so well. I imagine there will be people who might disagree with that and suggest that with properly optimized solutions, NoSQL is able to do this. And of course, this points out real-time interactive use, so that's the streaming aspect of this problem. And also, as the software is open source, it tends to be somewhat flaky and not easy to deploy robustly. Here's an example of effectively the earlier electronic medical records, but applied to diabetes and also identifying a particular feature. Namely, if you put together all the world's data relevant to diabetes, which is the actual patient records, the information on the disease, the information on the drugs, the information on the drug companies, information on the hospitals, then you get a rather complicated set of heterogeneous data, which this group proposes to convert to RDF, and that actually gives this graph-based structure, which we mentioned as being important. So if they look at this particular case, they point out that the patient record might have 100 areas where there will be a control vocabulary, and then 1,000, so actually discrete entries, and maybe 1,000 continuous values. Most of these values have a timestamp, and this makes it actually the processing not really a straightforward SQL command, but actually a relatively complicated piece of mathematics to be able to process this continuous time series data. And you have to calculate numerical derivatives on numerical rate of changes, compare them between patients. And so that actually makes some sort of NoSQL approach with a rather generic user-based, generic processing built on top of it I meant to say custom-built software that does the processing, calculates all the derivatives, and then finds its derived values to make a comparison between the various data sets. And then, but we still have to process this graph, and this work is with Mayo, and they have to work with an existing data warehouse, which needs to be converted from the traditional form into RDF. RDF comes from the semantic web community and is a very useful way of representing metadata. So here's another example from a researcher, faculty member at Indiana University called Statistical Relational Artificial Intelligence. And it's basically taking actually records, of typical relational database records, and applying machine language and other types of, well, here I call ego global optimization approaches to it. Ego always implies machine language in my classification scheme. His particular work, which his research has done on hundreds of gigabytes of data at the moment, but with a large cohort of patients that could get to hundreds of terabytes to a petabyte of data. And he points out that in some sense you can have too much data, and machine learning algorithms can actually be confused by too much data and extrapolate small coincidences into important deductions that need to be worried about. So this is pointing out that the machine learning, artificial intelligence research behind healthcare is a very vital area, and these researchers need to worry about parallelizing their analyses. And so that's non-trivial to do because they're not always trained in that area.